The mother bear didn't leave the coffin of this child. The reason put tears in everyone's eyes. Let us know where you're watching from, and if you're new to our channel, don't forget to subscribe. The winter morning in Pine Haven Village dawned with frost clinging to every window. 8-year-old Thaddeus Evergreen pressed his small fingers against the cold glass, watching his breath create foggy circles that expanded and disappeared. His bright blue eyes, unusual in this remote mountain settlement, sparkled with the excitement only a child could feel on such a bitter morning. "Mama, can I go explore the creek today?" Thaddeus asked, turning to where his mother Linnea stood, kneading bread dough with flour-covered hands. Her long auburn hair was tied back with a faded ribbon, and worry lines creased her forehead at her son's question. "Absolutely not, Thaddeus," she replied firmly. "Your father saw fresh bear tracks near Miller's Creek yesterday. The winter's been harsh, and they're coming closer to the village than ever before." Thaddeus's shoulders slumped. He'd been cooped up inside their small wooden cabin for 3 days straight as the snowstorm had raged outside. Now that the skies had finally cleared, he desperately wanted to feel the crunch of snow beneath his boots and see if the creek had frozen solid enough to slide on. "But, Mama—" "No buts, young man." Linnea's voice softened as she wiped her hands on her apron and crossed the room to kneel before her son. "Remember what happened to old man Silas last spring? Bears aren't creatures to trifle with, especially hungry ones." Thaddeus nodded solemnly, remembering the village funeral. Old Silas had gone fishing alone and never returned. They'd found only his torn jacket and fishing rod beside massive paw prints in the mud. Later that afternoon, while his mother napped and his father was at the village meeting hall, Thaddeus quietly pulled on his wool cap, mittens, and the red jacket his grandmother had knitted for his last birthday. He slipped a small jar of honey into his pocket, a treat he'd been saving, and crept out the back door, careful to close it silently behind him. The forest beyond Pine Haven was ancient and mysterious. Giant pines stretched toward the sky, their branches heavy with snow. Thaddeus followed the familiar path toward Miller's Creek, his small footprints the only marks disturbing the pristine white blanket. His breath came out in excited little clouds as he ventured deeper than he'd ever gone alone. A sound stopped him in his tracks, a soft whimpering coming from behind a fallen log. Curiously, overcoming caution, Thaddeus crept forward and peered over the massive trunk. What he saw made his heart leap into his throat. A bear cub, no larger than their neighbor's hunting dog, lay curled in the snow. Its fur was a rich cinnamon color, and it trembled violently, making pitiful noises that pulled at Thaddeus's heart. One of its paws appeared to be caught in what looked like an old hunter's trap, rusted and half buried in the snow. Every warning his parents had ever given him screamed in Thaddeus's mind. Where there was a cub, a mother bear would surely be nearby, and nothing was more dangerous than a mother protecting her young. He should run back to the village immediately and tell his father. Yet he couldn't bring himself to leave the suffering creature. The cub's eyes, amber-colored and filled with pain, locked onto his. In that moment something passed between them, a connection Thaddeus couldn't explain. Without fully understanding why, he reached into his pocket and pulled out his jar of honey. "It's okay," he whispered, his voice barely audible above the whisper of wind through the pines. "I'm not going to hurt you." The cub's whimpering quieted as Thaddeus cautiously approached, holding out the honey as a peace offering. Somewhere in the distance, a deep growl rumbled through the forest, sending shivers down the boy's spine. The mother bear was coming, and Thaddeus knew he had only moments to decide, flee for his life, or help the trapped cub and risk everything, His small fingers reached toward the rusted trap, his decision made. Thaddeus knelt in the snow, his heart hammering against his ribs as he examined the cruel metal teeth of the trap. The cub's paw wasn't completely crushed. The trap appeared old, and its spring mechanism had weakened with rust and time. Still, the metal teeth had broken the skin, and spots of crimson dotted the pristine snow beneath. "Shh, it's okay," Thaddeus whispered, his voice trembling almost as much as his hands. He placed the honey jar within the cub's reach, and the young bear cautiously stretched its neck to investigate, momentarily distracted from its pain. The distant growling grew louder, more insistent. Thaddeus knew he had perhaps a minute, maybe less. His father had once shown him how these traps worked. They had a release mechanism, a small lever on the side that would spring the jaws open. With shaking fingers, he brushed away snow and located the lever, pressing down with all the strength his small body could muster. For a terrifying moment, nothing happened. Then, with a metallic groan, the trap's jaws loosened. The cub immediately pulled its injured paw free, scrambling backward so quickly it bumped into the log. Thaddeus remained frozen in place, afraid any sudden movement might frighten the cub into crying out for its mother. The young bear licked tentatively at its wounded paw, then turned its amber eyes toward Thaddeus. There was something in that gaze, curiosity perhaps, or something deeper that the boy couldn't name. The cub made a soft huffing sound and, to Thaddeus's amazement, moved cautiously toward him rather than away. "You're welcome," Thaddeus whispered, hardly daring to breathe as the cub came within arm's reach. He remained perfectly still as the young bear sniffed his boots, then his knees, working its way up to his face. Its breath was warm against his cold cheeks, smelling of earth and honey. A thunderous roar shattered the moment. Through the trees, Thaddeus glimpsed movement, a massive shape charging toward them, snow flying in its wake. The mother bear, easily 7 feet tall when standing, burst into the small clearing, her massive paws sending snow spraying in all directions. Thaddeus's muscles locked with terror. Every instinct screamed for him to run, but his body refused to move. The mother bear halted just 20 feet away, rising onto her hind legs with another ear-splitting roar that seemed to shake snow from the surrounding pines. "Please," Thaddeus whispered, though he knew the bear couldn't understand. "I was just trying to help." The cub made a chirping sound and bounded awkwardly through the snow toward its mother, leaving small bloody paw prints behind. Thaddeus squeezed his eyes shut, certain these would be his final moments. Instead of the crushing weight of the bear's attack, Thaddeus heard a series of soft grunts and huffs. Cautiously opening one eye, he saw the mother bear had dropped to all fours. The cub was circling her legs, making excited noises, then looking back toward Thaddeus. It almost seemed like the cub was explaining what had happened. The mother bear, her fur a darker shade of cinnamon than her cub's, with silver tips that caught the winter sunlight, took a cautious step forward. Thaddeus remained motionless, afraid even the slightest movement might break whatever fragile understanding was forming. The massive grizzly approached until she was close enough that Thaddeus could feel the heat radiating from her body, could see the individual whiskers on her broad face. She sniffed him thoroughly, her wet nose pressing against his jacket, his hands lingering especially long where he had touched the trap. Then, to Thaddeus's utter disbelief, she made a low rumbling sound. Not a growl, but something almost like a purr, and gently nudged his shoulder with her massive head. "You're thanking me?" Thaddeus whispered in awe. The bear responded by sitting back on her haunches, watching him with intelligent eyes that seemed far too knowing for a wild animal. The cub, apparently deciding Thaddeus was no threat, began playfully batting at the honey jar, rolling it through the snow. Time seemed suspended in that clearing, as boy and bears shared an impossible moment of connection. Thaddeus slowly, carefully, reached into his pocket and removed the apple he'd grabbed for his own snack. He placed it in the snow before the mother bear, a peace offering between species. The grizzly delicately picked up the apple between her massive teeth, crunching it in a single bite. Then she made a huffing sound toward her cub, who reluctantly abandoned the now empty honey jar and limped to her side. "Your paw needs medicine," Thaddeus said softly. "I could bring some. My mom makes a pine salve that heals cuts really fast." As if understanding, the mother bear stared at him for a long moment before turning away. She paused at the edge of the clearing, looking back as if to ensure he was watching. The cub followed her, leaving a trail of small bloody paw prints that stood stark against the white snow. "I'll come back tomorrow," Thaddeus called after them. "I'll bring medicine and more honey." Only when the bears had disappeared among the trees did Thaddeus release the breath he'd been holding. His legs trembled as he stood, partly from cold, but mostly from the extraordinary encounter. He knew no one in the village would believe what had happened. They'd think he was spinning tales again, but Thaddeus knew what he'd experienced was real, and somehow, he sensed, it was just the beginning. The sun was already beginning its early winter descent as Thaddeus reluctantly turned toward home. His mind raced with plans for tomorrow's visit, never suspecting how this encounter would forever change, not just his life, but the lives of everyone in Pinehaven. For 3 weeks, Thaddeus kept his promise, sneaking away whenever possible to visit the bears. He'd learned their habits. The mother and cub typically appeared in the same clearing around midday, when winter sunlight warmed the protected hollow. He'd named the mother Mistral, after the cold mountain winds his grandmother had told stories about, and the cub he called Ember for her glowing amber eyes. Ember's paw had healed remarkably well with the pine salve Thaddeus had smuggled from his mother's healing cabinet. The young bear now romped through the snow with barely a limp, though a small scar remained visible on her pad when she offered her paw to Thaddeus, something she'd learned to do in exchange for treats. Today, Thaddeus had managed to slip away after his morning chores, bundled in layers against the deepening cold. February in the mountains meant temperatures that bit through clothing and froze exposed skin within minutes. He carried his usual offerings: honey, dried apples, and a special surprise, a smoked fish wrapped in cloth that he'd pilfered from the smokehouse. "Ember! Mistral!" he called softly as he entered their special clearing. Fresh tracks in the snow told him the bears had already arrived, though they weren't immediately visible. A familiar chirping sound preceded Ember's appearance as she bounded from behind a snow-laden spruce, shaking powder from her growing body. At 3 months since their first meeting, she had already grown noticeably larger, though she maintained her playful demeanor. Mistral followed more sedately, her massive form materializing from the shadows with surprising grace for such a large creature. "I brought something special today," Thaddeus announced, unwrapping the fish. The scent immediately caught both bears' attention, their noses lifting to sample the aroma on the cold air. What happened next became a routine that still filled Thaddeus with wonder. Instead of rushing forward to claim the treat, Mistral sat back on her haunches, watching patiently. Ember, though clearly excited, followed her mother's example, sitting beside her with visible restraint. Only when Thaddeus placed the offerings on a flat rock and stepped back did Mistral nod her massive head, giving Ember permission to approach first. Thaddeus settled onto a fallen log, brushing snow aside to create a dry seat. He watched the bears enjoy their treats, marveling at the bond that had formed between them. Sometimes he would talk to them. telling stories about village life or recounting lessons from school. Miss Strow would listen with what seemed like genuine interest, her intelligent eyes fixed on him, occasionally making soft sounds as if responding to his tales. "My father says the hunting parties will be heading out soon," Thaddeus told them, his voice tinged with worry. "The village stores are running low, and spring is still far away." Miss Straw tilted her head, and Thaddeus had the distinct impression she understood his concern. He'd noticed how she always positioned herself between Ember and the direction of the village, how her ears constantly swiveled to catch distant sounds of human activity. "You need to stay deeper in the forest," he continued earnestly. "Some men from the next village over have joined ours. They're not like my father. They hunt bears for their pelts, not just for food." As he spoke, a twig snapped somewhere behind him. Thaddeus turned, expecting to see a deer or perhaps a fox drawn by the scent of fish. Instead, he found himself staring into the shocked face of Mason Blackwood, his father's apprentice in the village carpentry shop. The 18-year-old stood frozen, his crossbow half raised, jaw hanging open at the scene before him. Young Thaddeus Evergreen sitting calmly among the most feared predators in the mountains, speaking to them as one might address old friends. "Thaddeus," Mason whispered hoarsely, "don't move." "Mason, wait," Thaddeus began, rising to his feet, but the sudden movement startled Ember, who let out a surprised yelp. What happened next seemed to unfold in terrible slow motion. Mason, trained by his father to react to bear sounds with immediate action, raised his crossbow. Miss Straw, seeing the weapon pointed toward her cub, released a thunderous roar and rose to her full height. Thaddeus threw himself forward, placing his small body between the hunter and the bears. "No!" he screamed. "They're my friends." The crossbow bolt released with a sharp twang, sailing over Thaddeus's head as Mason instinctively adjusted his aim upward, missing both boy and bears. The projectile embedded itself in a distant pine with a solid thunk. A moment of terrible silence followed, broken only by Mistral's deep, warning growls. Ember cowered behind her mother, peering fearfully around her massive form at the newcomer. "Have you lost your mind?" Mason hissed, frantically reaching for another bolt. "Get away from them now! Put it down!" Thaddeus pleaded, arms outstretched. "Please, Mason, they won't hurt us if we don't threaten them." Mason's eyes darted between Thaddeus and the bears, disbelief written across his features. "Those monsters killed old Silas. Your father would skin me alive if I left you here." "Old Silas was trapping cubs," Thaddeus said quietly, repeating something he'd overheard his father tell his mother late one night. "Everyone knows it, but nobody says it. He got what trappers risk." Mason's hands trembled on the crossbow. "You're just a child. You don't understand." "I understand that they trust me," Thaddeus interrupted, taking a careful step toward Mason. "And now you need to trust me. Lower the bow, Mason, please." Something in the boy's calm certainty gave the young man pause. Slowly, reluctantly, he lowered the weapon, though he kept it loaded and ready. "Now what?" he asked, voice barely above a whisper. "Now you meet my friends," Thaddeus said simply. He turned to the bears, who remained alert but hadn't fled. "Miss Straw, Ember, this is Mason. He's not going to hurt you." To Mason's utter astonishment, the massive mother bear gradually lowered herself to all fours, though her eyes never left the crossbow. The cub, sensing the tentative truce, cautiously emerged from behind her mother. "This is impossible," Mason breathed. "Bears don't behave this way." "These ones do," Thaddeus replied with a child's simple certainty. "They're special." For nearly an hour, Thaddeus mediated the tense introduction. By small degrees, Mason's fear transformed into cautious wonder as he witnessed the extraordinary relationship between boy and bears. When Ember finally accepted a dried apple slice from Mason's trembling hand, tears gathered in the young man's eyes. "You can't tell anyone," Thaddeus insisted, as they finally prepared to return to the village. "They'll hunt them down." Mason looked troubled. "Thaddeus, your parents are worried sick. You've been disappearing for weeks. They think you're just exploring, but if they knew, they can't know." Thaddeus interrupted desperately. "Promise me, Mason." The apprentice ran a hand through his dark hair, conflicted. "I won't tell, but Thaddeus, this can't last forever. What happens when more hunters come or when these bears encounter someone who isn't as accepting?" Thaddeus had no answer, but as they walked home through the deepening afternoon shadows, a seed of worry took root in his heart. The perfect secret world he'd created was suddenly vulnerable, and the consequences of discovery loomed like storm clouds on the horizon. The village meeting hall buzzed with tense voices as nearly every adult in Pine Haven crowded onto the wooden benches. Elias Evergreen, Thaddeus's father and head of the village council, stood at the front of the room beside the massive stone fireplace, his normally genial face set in grim lines. Beside him stood 3 strangers, hunters from Riverbend, the nearest settlement some 15 miles south. Thaddeus wasn't supposed to be there. Children were explicitly forbidden from council meetings, especially ones called with the urgency of tonight's gathering. But curiosity had driven him to his favorite hiding place, a small storage loft accessible through a narrow gap in the meeting hall's back wall. From this vantage point, concealed behind stacked fur pelts and dried herbs, he could see and hear everything. "Our stores won't last another month," Elias was saying, his deep voice carrying easily through the hall. "The winter has been harsher than any in living memory. Game has grown scarce in our usual hunting grounds." Murmurs of agreement rippled through the crowd. Thaddeus spotted his mother Linnea sitting near the front, her face drawn with worry. Beside her sat Mason, who had kept his promise of silence for the 3 weeks since discovering Thaddeus's secret, though the apprentice often cast troubled glances at the boy when their paths crossed in the village. "Our neighbors from Riverbend bring both opportunity and warning," Elias continued, gesturing to the strangers. The tallest among them stepped forward, a broad-shouldered man with a scar running from his left eye to his jaw, giving him a perpetual sneer. "Garrick Stonewall," the man introduced himself, his voice as rough as his appearance. "Chief Hunter of Riverbend. These are my brothers, Thorne and Blackwell." The other 2 men nodded curtly. All 3 carried elaborate compound bows strapped to their backs and wore necklaces of what appeared to be bear claws, a sight that made Thaddeus's stomach clench with dread. "We've tracked a pair of grizzlies into these mountains," Garrick announced without preamble. "A mother and nearly grown cub. They're responsible for killing 2 of our men and raiding our winter stores. We've followed their trail to the eastern ridge, less than 3 miles from your village." Gasps and worried exclamations filled the hall. From his hiding place, Thaddeus bit his lip to keep from crying out. He knew immediately which bears the hunters described, though the accusations had to be false. Mistral and Ember spent their days with him. They couldn't possibly have traveled to Riverbend and back. "These aren't ordinary bears," Thorne, the middle brother, added. His voice was higher than Garrick's, but no less menacing. "The mother is the largest grizzly any of us has ever seen. Some of our people believe she's a demon spirit. She's survived 3 hunting parties already." "Superstitious nonsense," Blackwell, the youngest, cut in. "But the bears are real enough, and dangerous. The cub has learned to unlatch doors and storage bins. The mother can stand over 8 feet tall." Thaddeus's father frowned, stroking his beard thoughtfully. "We've had no attacks here, though we've seen tracks closer to the village than usual this winter." "You've been lucky," Garrick said darkly. "But luck runs out. We propose a joint hunt. Your best men joined with ours. We'll rid these mountains of the beasts and share the meat and pelts between our villages." The meeting erupted into anxious discussion. From his hiding place, Thaddeus felt tears welling in his eyes. He had to warn Mistral and Ember, had to somehow protect them from what was coming. "When would this hunt take place?" Elias asked when the noise had subsided. 3 days from now," Garrick replied. "New moon. We'll have the advantage of darkness while the bears will be bedded down." Thaddeus's father nodded slowly, his expression troubled. "I'll need to discuss this with the council. You and your brothers are welcome to stay in our guest lodge tonight. We'll give you our answer in the morning." As the meeting dispersed, Thaddeus remained hidden, trembling with fear and resolution. Only when the hall had emptied did he slip out through his secret entrance, racing through the darkness toward his home. He needed supplies if he was going to reach Mistral's den tonight, a journey he'd made only once before, when the mother bear had led him to their winter sanctuary during an unusually warm day in January. Slipping silently into his house, Thaddeus gathered what he needed: his warmest cloak, dried provisions, a small lantern, and most importantly, his father's detailed map of the mountain paths. If he left now and traveled through the night, he could reach the den by dawn, warning Mistral and Ember in time for them to flee deeper into the mountains, beyond the hunter's reach. As he was securing the last items in his small pack, a floorboard creaked behind him. Thaddeus whirled to find his mother standing in the doorway of his room, her eyes moving from his face to the packed bag. "Going somewhere?" Linnea asked quietly. No accusation in her voice, only a deep sadness that made Thaddeus's heart ache. "Mama, he began, but the lie died on his lips. Something in his mother's expression told him she already knew far more than he had suspected. Linnea sighed, entering the room and sitting on the edge of his bed. "Mason spoke with me this afternoon, after you'd gone to your lessons. He was torn between keeping his promise to you and protecting you from yourself." Thaddeus felt a surge of betrayal, quickly followed by understanding. Mason had never actually promised not to tell his mother, only to keep the secret from the village at large. "They're not dangerous, Mama," Thaddeus said earnestly, sitting beside her. "Not like those hunters say. I've spent almost every day with them, and they've never once tried to hurt me. Mistral even brought me a fish once, when the ice on the creek was too thin for me to cross." Linnea's eyes widened at these details, confirming what Mason had told her. "Thaddeus, even if what you say is true about these particular bears, wild animals remain unpredictable. What you've been doing is incredibly dangerous." "More dangerous than what those men plan to do," Thaddeus countered, his voice rising with emotion. "They're going to kill them, Mama, and for no reason Mistral and Ember couldn't have hurt anyone in Riverbend. They've been here with me." Linnea studied her son's face for a long moment. Something in his absolute conviction gave her pause. She had always known Thaddeus was special, had sensed from his birth that he possessed a connection to the natural world that others lacked. Her own mother had had the same gift, though to a lesser degree. "These bears," she said finally, choosing her words with care. "You're certain they're the ones the hunters seek?" Thaddeus nodded vigorously. "Mistral is huge, just like they described, and Ember is almost grown now. But Mama, they don't raid villages or attack people. They stay in the eastern valleys, far from any settlements." Linnea was silent for several minutes, her mind working through possibilities and consequences. Finally, she stood and moved to Thaddeus's small desk, pulling a piece of parchment toward her. The den, which had been lined with dried grasses and soft pine boughs during his previous visit, was in disarray. Signs of a violent struggle were everywhere. Blood spattered the stone walls, and deep gouges marked where powerful claws had scraped against rock. Most telling of all was a broken crossbow bolt embedded in the cave floor, its shaft smeared with blood. "They were here," Thaddeus choked out, tears streaming down his face. "Those hunters from Riverbend, they lied. They already knew exactly where to find them." Linnea knelt beside her son, her own face grave as she examined the scene. With practiced eyes, she read the story told by the scattered evidence: the surprise attack in the night, the desperate defense, the flight. "The bears escaped," she said with certainty, pointing to a trail of blood droplets leading deeper into the cave. "See there," the hunters pursued, but the bears knew their territory. "There's a second exit." Hope flickered in Thaddeus's tear-filled eyes. "How do you know?" "The draft," Linnea explained, indicating how the small flame of their lantern bent toward the cave's depths. "There's airflow from another opening. Your friends are wounded, but alive. At least, they were when they fled." "We have to find them," Thaddeus said, determination replacing despair. "Before the hunters track them down, or before they bleed to—" He couldn't finish the terrible thought. A sound from the valley entrance made both mother and son freeze. Footsteps crunched on snow, drawing steadily nearer. Linnea pushed Thaddeus behind her, drawing the small hunting knife she carried at her belt. A pitiful defense if the Riverbend hunters had returned. A figure appeared at the ravine's mouth, tall and lean against the morning light. For a heartbeat, Linnea prepared to attack. Then recognition dawned. "Mason," she called cautiously. The apprentice carpenter stepped fully into view, his face haggard from a night of following their trail. "Thank the stars I found you," he panted, crossing quickly to them. "The village is in an uproar. The Riverbend hunters discovered your note, Mrs. Evergreen. They're convinced you've gone to warn their quarry." "Which is exactly what we've done," Linnea replied steadily. "Though we arrived too late. There was an attack here last night." Mason's eyes widened as he took in the blood-spattered cave entrance. "Are the bears?" "Alive, we think," Thaddeus interjected. "But hurt and running. We have to help them." Mason looked troubled. "It's worse than you know. Garrick is claiming these bears killed his youngest brother 6 months ago. He's turned this hunt into a blood vendetta. Half the village men have joined them, including your father, Thaddeus." The news hit like a physical blow. Elias Evergreen, who had always taught his son to respect all creatures and take only what was needed from the forest, was now hunting Mistral and Ember with murderous intent. "Did you tell him the truth?" Linnea asked Mason quietly. "About Thaddeus and the bears." Mason shook his head. "I tried, but Garrick had poisoned the well. He suggested the bears might have enchanted the boy." Mason's expression showed what he thought of such superstition. No one would listen to reason after that. Thaddeus had stopped paying attention to the adults' conversation. Instead, he had moved deeper into the cave, following the blood trail with his lantern held high. The path led to a narrow fissure in the back wall, barely wide enough for Mistral's massive body to squeeze through, and a tight fit even for humans. "I know where they're going," he announced suddenly, returning to his mother and Mason. "The healing pools." Linnea's eyebrows rose in surprise. "The hot springs in the Western Valley." That's 10 miles from here, through the worst mountain terrain. Miss Stroud took me there once, Thaddeus explained. When Ember cut her paw on sharp rocks, the warm water and the minerals helped it heal faster. If she's badly wounded, that's where she'll go. Mason and Linnea exchanged concerned glances. The hunting party will be tracking them by now, Mason pointed out, and they have horses for the accessible parts of the journey. But they don't know these mountains like Miss Stroud does, Thaddeus countered stubbornly, and they don't know about the caves. Caves? Both adults questioned simultaneously. Thaddeus nodded, a plan forming in his young mind. There's a network of caves that runs through the mountain. Miss Stroud showed me some of the entrances. If we go through them instead of over the ridges, we can reach the healing pools before the hunting party. Linnea studied her son with new eyes, beginning to understand the depth of the relationship he had formed with these wild creatures. No ordinary bears would share such secrets with a human child, nor would an ordinary child be able to gain such trust from creatures humans had hunted for generations. And there's a stone formation near the exit that looks like a giant bear standing on its hind legs, like a guardian protecting the path. Mason finished the last of his orange segment, carefully wrapping the peel in a cloth to avoid leaving any trace of their passing. How much farther to this guardian's chamber? About 2 hours if we keep a good pace, Thaddeus replied. After that, it's maybe another 3 hours to the healing pools. A distant rumble caused all three to fall silent, listening intently. The sound came again. Not from within the cave system, but transmitted through the mountain rock from somewhere far above. Thunder? Mason suggested hopefully. Linnea shook her head. Blasting powder. The hunters are trying to flush the bears out by collapsing some of the surface cave entrances. Thaddeus's eyes widened in alarm. But that could bring down sections of the whole network. These caves are all connected. As if to emphasize his point, a fine shower of dust and small pebbles rained down from the ceiling, causing them to shield their faces and food. We need to move, Linnea decided, quickly repacking their supplies. If they're using blasting powder, they've lost the trail and are growing desperate. That makes them unpredictable and dangerous. They resumed their journey with renewed urgency, Thaddeus setting a faster pace than before. The blood trail they followed had grown alarmingly consistent. No longer occasional droplets, but a nearly continuous smear along one wall of the passage. Whatever wound Mistral had sustained was serious, perhaps life-threatening without intervention. Another distant explosion shook the mountain as they entered a narrower tunnel, this one barely tall enough for Mason to walk upright. Larger chunks of stone clattered down around them, and a worrying crack appeared in the ceiling just ahead. "Run!" Mason shouted, recognizing the imminent collapse. He shoved Thaddeus forward, with Linnea close behind. The three sprinted through the disintegrating passage as the rumbling grew louder, the crack widening with terrifying speed. They burst into a larger chamber just as the tunnel behind them collapsed with a thunderous roar, sending a billowing cloud of dust after them. Coughing and blinded, they staggered deeper into the chamber, desperately seeking clean air. When the dust finally began to settle, the devastating truth became clear. Their path back was completely blocked by tons of fallen rock. The only way now was forward, toward the healing pools and whatever awaited them there. "Are you both all right?" Linnea asked, her voice hoarse from the dust. Mason and Thaddeus nodded, though all three were covered in a thick layer of gray powder that made them look like ghosts. More concerning was the state of their supplies. One of their 2 lanterns had been smashed in their headlong flight, and Linnea's pack had been partially crushed, destroying half their remaining food and cracking their water flask. "We have maybe 6 hours of lantern oil left," Mason assessed grimly. After that, we'll be in complete darkness." Thaddeus appeared strangely calm, despite their dire circumstances. "We don't need the lanterns once we reach the Guardian's chamber," he said confidently. "There's a kind of glowing moss that grows there. It gives enough light to see by. Mistral always extinguishes our flame when we reach that point." Again, Linnea marveled at her son's knowledge and the extraordinary relationship he had developed with the bears. Any lingering doubts about the special nature of these animals were rapidly fading in the face of mounting evidence. They continued forward, now committed irrevocably to their course. The passages grew gradually larger, the ceiling rising until it disappeared beyond the reach of their remaining lantern. The air became noticeably warmer and more humid, carrying a faint mineral scent that grew stronger with each step. "We're getting close to the Guardian's chamber," Thaddeus announced after nearly 2 hours of steady progress. "Listen. You can hear the lake." Indeed, the sound of gently lapping water echoed from somewhere ahead, accompanied by a soft, melodious dripping that created an almost musical backdrop to their journey. The blood trail they had been following grew fainter as the stone floor became smoother, worn down by countless years of water flow. Mistral must have entered the lake, Linnea surmised, kneeling to examine the last visible blood smear. Cold water would help slow the bleeding. A final turning of the passage brought them to the entrance of the Guardian's chamber, and all three stopped in amazement at the sight before them. The cavern was immense, larger than the entire village of Pinehaven, with a vaulted ceiling that rose at least 100 feet above a midnight blue underground lake. Just as Thaddeus had described, a narrow path circled the water's edge, leading to a distant exit on the far side. Most remarkable was the illumination. Thousands of patches of pale blue-green moss clung to the walls and ceiling, creating a gentle, otherworldly glow that reflected off the still water. The effect was like standing beneath a night sky filled with blue stars, their light strong enough to clearly illuminate the path without the harshness of their lantern flame. "It's beautiful," Mason breathed, extinguishing their lantern to fully appreciate the natural wonder. "There," Thaddeus pointed excitedly toward the water. "Look!" Near the center of the lake, 2 dark shapes were visible, the unmistakable forms of bears swimming slowly toward the far shore. The smaller figure, Ember, appeared to be supporting the larger one, helping the wounded Mistral maintain her course through the deep water. "They're alive!" Thaddeus's voice echoed across the chamber, causing the bears to pause in their swimming. Ember's head turned toward them, and even at this distance they could see recognition in her posture. "We need to hurry," Linnea urged, already moving along the narrow ledge that circled the lake. "They're heading for the healing pools, but in Mistral's condition, she might not make it that far without help." They proceeded as quickly as safety allowed, keeping one shoulder against the cavern wall while their feet found purchase on the slick stone path. When they were approximately halfway around the lake, Mason suddenly raised his hand for silence. "Listen," he whispered urgently. From the passage they had just exited came the unmistakable sounds of pursuit, voices, the clatter of equipment, and the scrape of boots on stone. The hunting party had found their trail and followed them into the cave system. "How is that possible?" Linnea hissed. "The tunnel collapsed behind us." "There must be another entrance they discovered," Mason replied grimly. "One that connects to our path." Thaddeus looked desperately toward the bears, now nearing the far shore. "We need to warn them." "No," Linnea caught his arm as he prepared to call out. "Sound carries too well in here. If we alert the bears, we'll reveal our own position too. Then we keep moving," Mason decided. "Reach the bears before the hunters enter this chamber." They quickened their pace, now moving with less caution than wisdom dictated. The path grew narrower as they progressed, in some places barely a foot wide with a sheer drop into the deep water on one side. Despite the urgency, they were forced to slow down in these sections, inching sideways with their backs pressed against the cavern wall. The voices behind them grew gradually louder. Occasionally, a shaft of lantern light would probe the entrance passage, signaling how close their pursuers had drawn. "There's the Guardian," Thaddeus whispered as they rounded a final bend in the path. Looming before them was exactly what he had described, a massive stalagmite formation that had grown over millennia into a shape remarkably like a bear rearing on its hind legs, front paws raised as if to ward off intruders. It stood directly before the chamber's exit, creating a natural choke point in the path. Beyond the stone guardian, they could see Mistral and Ember had reached the shore. The mother bear collapsed onto the stone beach, her massive form heaving with exhaustion. Even from a distance, they could see the terrible wound in her side. A crossbow bolt protruded from just behind her left shoulder, the flesh around it swollen and discolored. Ember nuzzled her mother frantically, making soft whimpering sounds that echoed across the water. The young bear's own coat was matted with blood, though whether her own or her mother's was impossible to tell at this distance. "We're almost there," Thaddeus encouraged, leading them toward the Guardian formation. "Just a little." "There they are." A triumphant shout from behind cut off his words. Turning, they saw lantern light flooding the chamber entrance as the first of the hunting party emerged. Though the distance was too great to make out individual faces, the silhouettes of at least 6 men were visible, bows and crossbows raised. "Run!" Mason pushed Thaddeus and Linnea ahead of him, placing his body between them and the hunters. "Get to the bears." They sprinted the final distance to the Guardian formation just as the first crossbow bolt whistled past, splashing into the lake beside them. Taking cover behind the massive stone bear, they paused to catch their breath and assess their situation. "We're trapped," Linnea stated the obvious, peering around the formation toward the hunters who were now proceeding carefully along the narrow path. "They have ranged weapons and the only other exit is beyond the bears." "Then we make our stand here," Mason said grimly, lifting a heavy stone from the ground, their only available weapon. Thaddeus, however, wasn't listening to the adults. His attention was focused entirely on the wounded Mistral, who had somehow found the strength to raise her massive head at their approach. In her pain-clouded eyes he saw recognition, and something more. Understanding. "No," he whispered, an idea forming in his mind. "We don't fight. We ask for help." Before either adult could stop him, Thaddeus darted from behind the stone guardian and ran toward the fallen mother bear, his small form illuminated by the glowing moss that made him a perfect target for the hunter's weapons. "Thaddeus!" Linnea's agonized cry echoed through the chamber as she lunged after her son, with Mason close behind. A crossbow bolt flew toward the running boy, its trajectory dead on, until an auburn blur intercepted it. Ember had thrown herself into the path of the projectile, the bolt grazing her shoulder instead of finding its intended target. The young bear stumbled, but remained upright, positioning herself protectively before Thaddeus as he reached Mistral's side. What happened next would forever change the village of Pinehaven and the lives of everyone present in the Guardian's chamber. As the hunting party drew closer along the narrow path, now close enough that individual faces were recognizable, Thaddeus knelt beside the wounded mother bear and placed his small hand on her massive head. "Please," he said simply, "help us." Mistral's eyes, filmed with pain yet still alert, held his gaze for a long moment. Then, with tremendous effort, she raised her massive body to a standing position, towering over the kneeling boy. Blood flowed freely from her wound, but some new strength seemed to fill her, a final reserve of power drawn from depths beyond normal endurance. The mother bear threw back her head and released a roar that shook the very mountain around them. The sound reverberated through the cavern, amplified by the acoustics until it became almost physical in its force. Stalactites shivered overhead, some breaking free to plunge into the dark waters below. And then, from passages unknown to any human, came the response. Answering roars, first one, then three, then a dozen or more, echoing through hidden tunnels that connected to the Guardian's chamber from all directions. The hunters froze on the narrow path, their faces transforming from confidence to dawning horror as they realized what was happening. Mistral had called her kin, every bear within hearing distance of her desperate summons, and they were coming. The first new bear entered the chamber through a previously invisible tunnel near the ceiling, a massive male with a silver-streaked coat that identified him as one of the oldest and largest grizzlies in the mountains. He descended a natural stone ramp to the chamber floor with surprising grace for a creature of his size. Two more followed from different entrances, younger males with battle scars that spoke of survived conflicts with both nature and mankind. Within minutes, the Guardian's chamber had become a gathering place for nearly 20 bears of various ages and sizes. They positioned themselves strategically around the chamber, some on the stone beach near Mistral, others on ledges overlooking the lake, and three particularly large males blocking the exit passage behind Thaddeus and his companions. The hunting party, now clearly visible in the blue-green moss light, had stopped their advance. Garrick Stonewall stood at their head, his scarred face contorted with rage and disbelief. Beside him stood his remaining brother Thorn, along with 3 villagers from Pinehaven. At the rear of their group stood Elias Evergreen, Thaddeus's father, his crossbow lowered as he stared in shock at the scene before him, his wife and son standing among a congregation of the most feared predators in the mountains, seemingly unafraid. "Thaddeus?" Elias called, his voice cracking with emotion. "Linnea?" "Father," Thaddeus responded, stepping forward slightly. "You have to stop this. These bears aren't what the Riverbend hunters told you." Garrick spat on the stone path. "More proof of the beast's witchcraft. They've enchanted the boy and his mother." "No enchantment, Garrick," Mason countered, moving to stand beside Thaddeus. "Just understanding. These bears have never attacked Pinehaven. They've never raided our stores or threatened our people. Your claims were lies from the beginning." Thorn Stonewall raised his crossbow, aiming it directly at Mason. "Our brother died by bear claws 6 months ago. We swore vengeance on every bear in these mountains." "Your brother died because he was raiding a hibernation den for cubs to sell in the southern markets," Linnea called out, her clear voice carrying across the water. "Everyone in Riverbend knows this, though none speak of it openly." Gasps came from the Pinehaven men, who turned accusatory eyes toward the Stonewall brothers. Garrick's face darkened with fury. "Silence, woman! The bears have taken your mind as well as the boys." Elias Evergreen stepped forward, placing a restraining hand on Garrick's arm. "My wife doesn't lie, Stonewall. If what she says is true, you brought us into this hunt under false pretenses." "What does it matter why we hunt them?" Garrick snarled, shaking off Elias's hand. "They're beasts, dangerous predators that threaten all human settlements. Look around you, man. We're surrounded by monsters that could tear us apart in seconds." "And yet they haven't," Elias observed quietly, his eyes fixed on his son, who stood protectively beside the wounded mother bear. "Despite our weapons, despite the bolt in that one side, they haven't attacked. Why? The chamber fell silent as this simple question hung in the air. Even the bears seemed to be waiting for the answer, their massive forms unnaturally still as the humans deliberated. The impasse was broken by the arrival of one final bear, smaller than the others, with a distinctive white blaze on her chest. She entered through the same passage Thaddeus and his companions had used, moving with the stiffness of advanced age. The other bears parted respectfully as she made her way to Mistral's side. Thaddeus gasped in recognition. "The Elder," he whispered loudly enough for all to hear. "Mistral's grandmother." The ancient bear approached the wounded Mistral, gently examining the protruding bolt with her nose. Then, to the astonishment of all present, she turned toward the hunting party and sat back on her haunches in a pose that could only be described as deliberate communication. Her intelligent eyes fixed on the humans across the lake. She raised one paw and gestured toward Mistral, then toward the exit passage that led to the healing pools. "She's asking permission to take Mistral to the healing pools," Thaddeus interpreted, absolute certainty in his voice. "She's offering peace if we allow them to tend to their wounded." "Nonsense," Garrick scoffed. "Bears don't reason, they don't negotiate, and they certainly don't ask permission. This is some kind of trap." "If it were a trap, we'd already be dead," Elias replied reasonably. He studied the tableau before him, his son and wife unharmed among the bears, the wounded mother bear still protecting her cub despite her injury, and the ancient bear making what certainly appeared to be a deliberate, communicative gesture. Making his decision, Elias lowered his crossbow completely and secured it to his back. "I'm crossing to my family," he announced. "Any man who fires upon me or upon these bears without direct provocation will answer to the full council of Pinehaven." "You're making a terrible mistake," Garrick warned, though he made no move to stop Elias as the carpenter began carefully traversing the narrow path around the lake. The journey seemed to take an eternity, with tension building with each step Elias took. The bears watched his approach without aggression, though several shifted their weight in preparation for action should it become necessary. When Elias finally reached the stone beach, Thaddeus ran to his father, throwing his arms around him in a tearful embrace. "I knew you'd understand, Father," the boy sobbed against Elias's chest. "I knew you'd see the truth." Elias held his son close, his eyes never leaving the imposing circle of bears that surrounded them. Linnea approached more cautiously, placing a hand on her husband's shoulder. "You believe us?" she asked quietly. Elias nodded slowly. "I've known since midwinter that Thaddeus was hiding something. I followed him once, saw him sitting with these bears in a clearing, sharing food and stories like old friends. I thought I was hallucinating, or that the winter cold had affected my mind. I never mentioned it, afraid of what it might mean." "It means we've been wrong," Mason said, joining the family circle. "About bears, about what they understand, about their capacity for reasoning and memory." A low moan from Mistral brought their attention back to the wounded mother bear. The crossbow bolt in her side had shifted during her exertion, driving deeper into the muscle. Blood flowed more freely now, and her breathing had grown shallow and labored. The elder bear made her strange gesture again, more urgently this time, then began nudging Mistral toward the exit passage. Ember whimpered, pressing her body against her mother's uninjured side to help support in her weight. "They need to reach the healing pools," Thaddeus explained to his father. "The warm mineral water helps close wounds and fight infection, but they're asking if it's safe to move, if we'll allow it." Elias looked from his son to the bears, then back to the hunting party still positioned on the far side of the lake. Garrick and Thorne had their weapons raised, faces twisted with hatred and incomprehension. The Pinehaven men, however, had followed Elias's example and lowered their bows, watching the unfolding scene with cautious wonder. "They can go," Elias called out, his voice echoing through the chamber. "No one from Pinehaven will hinder them." "Traitor!" Garrick roared, raising his crossbow and taking aim, not at the bears, but at Elias. "If you stand with beasts, you die with beasts." What happened next occurred with such speed that later accounts would differ in the details. Thorn grabbed his brother's weapon, forcing the aim upward so the bolt embedded harmlessly in the cavern ceiling. In the struggle that followed, both brothers lost their footing on the narrow path and plunged into the dark waters of the underground lake. Neither man resurfaced immediately, the weight of their weapons and winter gear dragging them downward. Without hesitation, two of the younger bears dove into the water. Powerful swimmers, they disappeared beneath the surface only to emerge moments later, each grasping a sputtering, terrified Stonewall brother by the collar. The bears dragged the men to the nearest shore, the same beach where Thaddeus and his family stood, and deposited them unceremoniously on the stone before backing away to a respectful distance. Garrick and Thorn lay gasping and shivering, their weapons lost to the depths of the lake, their hatred temporarily forgotten in the shock of their rescue. "They saved you," Thaddeus said simply, looking down at the brothers. "Even knowing you came to kill them, they saved you. Do you understand now?" Thorn's expression reflected dawning comprehension, but Garrick merely spat lake water and glared sullenly at the surrounding bears. Some hatreds ran too deep for even miraculous intervention to effect. With the immediate threat neutralized, attention returned to Mistral. The wounded mother bear had collapsed again during the commotion, her strength finally failing. The elder bear made distressed sounds, nosing at Mistral's face to keep her conscious. "We need to remove the bolt," Linnea said decisively, her healer's instincts taking over. "She'll never make it to the pools with that still embedded." "The bears will never let you near enough to help," Garrick sneered from his prone position, apparently recovered enough for malice. "Wild animals don't understand human assistance." As if to directly contradict his words, the elder bear backed away from Mistral, creating space for Linnea to approach. The circle of protective bears parted, forming a path while maintaining their defensive perimeter. Linnea knelt beside the massive grizzly, her movements slow and deliberate. "Thaddeus, I need my medicine pouch from my pack," she instructed calmly, as though treating an injured bear was something she did routinely. While Thaddeus retrieved the requested items, Linnea examined the wound more closely. "The bolt hasn't reached any vital organs," she assessed, "but it's deep in the muscle. Removing it will cause significant bleeding that we'll need to control immediately." "What can we do?" Elias asked, kneeling beside his wife. "I need clean water, my sewing kit, and the green leaf poultice from the blue container," Linnea replied, already working to clean the area around the wound. "Mason, tear strips from the spare tunic in my pack for bandages." What followed was perhaps the most extraordinary surgical operation ever performed in the mountain region. A human healer treating a wounded grizzly bear, surrounded by a protective circle of the bear's kin, while hunters and family alike watched in amazement. Ember remained by her mother's head throughout the procedure, making soft, comforting sounds whenever Mistral groaned in pain. The elder bear supervised with keen interest, occasionally sniffing Linnea's poultices and medicines, as though assessing their efficacy. After nearly an hour of painstaking work, Linnea succeeded in removing the bolt, cleaning the wound, and applying a compression bandage reinforced with healing herbs. Throughout the entire ordeal, Mistral remained conscious but compliant, only occasionally rumbling in discomfort when the pain became too intense. "She needs rest now," Linnea announced, sitting back on her heels and wiping sweat from her brow despite the cavern's cool temperature. And clean water. The healing pools would still be beneficial, but not if getting there would reopen the wound. The elder bear made a decisive sound and gestured again toward the exit passage. Two of the largest male bears positioned themselves on either side of Miss Strow, allowing her to lean against them for support. With infinite care, they began helping the wounded mother bear toward the tunnel that led to the healing pools, with Ember following anxiously behind. As the procession of bears began filing out of the guardian's chamber, the elder bear remained behind. She approached Thaddeus and gently nudged his hand with her nose, a gesture of gratitude that brought tears to the boy's eyes. Then, to the astonishment of all present, she repeated the gesture with Linnea, Elias, and finally Mason. Garrick and Thorne she ignored completely, turning her back on them in what could only be interpreted as deliberate rejection. Before departing, she paused at the chamber exit and looked back at the humans, her ancient eyes containing a clear message that transcended the barriers of language and species. Then she too disappeared into the passage, following her family to the healing pools beyond. The Pinehaven men, who had observed everything from across the lake, began making their way around the narrow path to join Elias and the others. Their expressions reflected the transformative experience they had witnessed, fear and prejudice giving way to wonder and newfound respect. "What happens now?" Mason asked quietly as they all gathered on the stone beach. Elias looked toward the passage where the bears had vanished, then back at his son, whose extraordinary bond had made this impossible meeting possible. "Now," he said thoughtfully, "we return to Pinehaven and tell a story that will change our village forever." Spring came early to the mountains that year. By mid-March, the heavy snows had retreated to only the highest peaks, and the valleys bloomed with wildflowers in a riotous celebration of renewed life. Pinehaven Village buzzed with activity as people emerged from winter's confinement to repair storm damage, prepare planting fields, and, most significantly, construct a series of new buildings along the village's eastern edge. "The observation platform needs to be higher," Thaddeus instructed importantly, standing beside his father as they surveyed the ongoing construction. "Miss Strahl and the others won't approach if they feel trapped or unable to see all directions." Elias nodded, making a notation on his plans. "We'll raise it another 4 feet and add a second access ramp. That should provide better visibility for both humans and bears." In the 3 months since the extraordinary events in the Guardian's chamber, Pinehaven had undergone a transformation more profound than mere physical construction. The story brought back by Elias and his hunting party of intelligent bears that reasoned, communicated, and showed mercy had initially been met with disbelief and skepticism. But when Thaddeus had led a carefully selected group of villagers to a clearing near Miss Straw's recovered den for a supervised meeting with the bears, doubt had given way to astonishment, and finally to acceptance of a new reality. "Mama says the honey stores are ready," Thaddeus reported, watching a team of carpenters adjust the platform's supporting beams. "And Grandmother Willow finished the ceremonial blanket yesterday." "Just in time," Elias replied with a smile. "The messenger from Riverbend arrived this morning. Their delegation will reach us by tomorrow noon." This news caused Thaddeus to pause in his supervision, his young face growing serious. "Will they honor the agreement, after everything that happened?" Elias placed a reassuring hand on his son's shoulder. "The new council in Riverbend has given their word. Without Garrick's influence, they seem genuine in their desire for reconciliation." The events following their return from the caves had unfolded with remarkable speed. Garrick Stonewall, unmoved by his miraculous rescue and unwilling to relinquish his hatred, had attempted to organize another hunting party immediately upon their return to Pinehaven. Finding no support among the villagers who had witnessed the bear's intelligence and restraint, he had departed alone, swearing vengeance. 3 days later, trappers had found his body at the base of a cliff, a victim of treacherous spring ice and his own blind rage rather than any animal attack. Thorn, by contrast, had undergone a profound change of heart. Returned to Riverbend, he had challenged the old council, revealing the truth about his youngest brother's death and advocating for a new relationship with both the bears and neighboring human settlements. The resulting political upheaval had eventually stabilized with Thorn himself, elected as head of a reformed village council committed to more sustainable and respectful interaction with the natural world. "Father," Thaddeus said suddenly, his attention caught by movement at the forest edge, "they're here early." Elias turned to see an extraordinary procession emerging from the tree line. At its head walked the elder bear, moving slowly but with dignity despite her advanced years. Behind her came nearly 30 bears of various ages, including several cubs born during the winter months. Among them, instantly recognizable by the healed scar on her side, walked Mistral, with a fully grown Ember close beside her. "Quickly," Elias called to the nearby workers. "Alert the village. Our guests have arrived." The long-planned meeting, the first formal gathering between the human settlements and the bear clans, was about to begin, days ahead of schedule. Messengers raced through Pinehaven, spreading the news from house to house. Within minutes, villagers began converging on the newly constructed meeting grounds, faces alight with excitement and nervousness in equal measure. Linnea emerged from the healer's cottage, carrying a bundle of ceremonial herbs and the special honey cakes she had prepared for the occasion. Mason Blackwood, recently appointed as Pinehaven's official bear ambassador, a position created specifically for him, hurried to help organize the village children, who had been practiced in appropriate behaviors for this historic occasion. "Remember," he instructed the wide-eyed youngsters, "no sudden movements, no loud noises, and absolutely no throwing things. Percival Harker." This last was directed at a notoriously mischievous 10-year-old, who managed to look simultaneously innocent and disappointed at having his plans preemptively thwarted. As the bears approached the village boundary, they maintained perfect formation. Elders in front, mothers with cubs in the protected center, and the largest males forming a defensive perimeter. They halted at the edge of the newly cleared meeting ground, waiting with what could only be described as ceremonial patience. Thaddeus, unable to contain himself, broke protocol and ran forward to greet them. Ember immediately detached herself from the group, meeting the boy halfway in what had become their customary greeting, the young bear sitting back on her haunches while Thaddeus pressed his forehead briefly against hers. "She's gotten so big," Linnea murmured to her husband as they watched the interaction. "Hard to believe she was ever small enough to be caught in that old trap." Elias nodded, memory darkening his expression momentarily. "If not for that trap, and our son's compassion, we might still be hunting these remarkable creatures, never knowing what we were truly destroying." The formal ceremony began with an exchange of gifts, an ancient human tradition that the bears seemed to intuitively understand. Elias presented the elder bear with a ceremonial blanket woven with symbols of mountains, forests, and intertwined bear and human figures. The aged bear accepted the offering with grave dignity, then gestured to 2 younger bears who came forward, carrying a large honeycomb carefully balanced between them, the bear's reciprocal gift to the human settlement. What followed was a carefully choreographed series of interactions designed to build trust and establish boundaries for future cooperation. Children were gradually introduced to the younger bears, supervised closely by both human parents and bear mothers. By sunset, small groups of children and bear cubs were cautiously playing together at the edges of the clearing, their natural curiosity overcoming centuries of instilled fear. 2 years passed, bringing profound changes to Pine Haven and the surrounding mountain communities. The Bear Treaty, as it came to be known, had expanded to include 3 human settlements and 5 bear clans. Regular meetings occurred with the changing of seasons, and a complex system of mutual assistance had developed. Bears helped locate lost travelers and warned of avalanche conditions, while humans provided medical care for injured bears and protected denning sites from outside hunters. On a crisp autumn morning, Thaddeus, now 10 years old, and recognized throughout the region as the primary interpreter between species, sat cross-legged in a sun-dappled clearing, deep in conversation with Ember. The young bear, fully grown into her adult size though still playful by nature, lay comfortably opposite him, occasionally responding to his words with soft grunts or expressive movements of her massive head. "Mama says the trading party from the southern valleys will arrive next week," Thaddeus informed her, sharing the latest village news as had become their custom. They've never seen bears except as pelts or circus performers. Elder Frost will need to decide which bears should be present for the first meeting. Ember made a questioning sound, tilting her head toward the mountains where the elder bear, renamed Elder Frost by the villagers for her silver-tinged coat, maintained her den. "Yes, I've already asked Mother to prepare the special honey cakes," Thaddeus replied with a grin, somehow understanding the bear's unspoken inquiry. "Extra blackberries, just as she prefers." Their peaceful exchange was interrupted by the arrival of Mason, now 20 years old, and carrying himself with the confidence of a man who had found his true calling. As official bear ambassador, he spent most of his time maintaining the delicate relationships between human settlements and bear clans, mediating disputes and ensuring mutual respect for the territorial boundaries. "There you are," he called to Thaddeus as he entered the clearing. "Your father needs you back at the village. The new observation tower is complete, and he wants your opinion before the dedication ceremony." Ember rose to her feet at Mason's approach, greeting him with a gentle bump of her massive head against his outstretched hand. The gesture, once unthinkable, had become a common greeting between trusted humans and bears, a symbol of the extraordinary transformation in human-bear relations. "Is Mistral back from the northern ranges?" Thaddeus asked, brushing leaves from his trousers as he stood. Mason nodded. "Returned last night with important news. The northern bear clans are considering joining our treaty. They've sent representatives to meet with Elder Frost." This was significant information. The northern bears were larger, more aggressive, and had suffered more extensively from human hunting. Their territory extended beyond the mountains into lowland regions, where human settlements were more numerous and less understanding of bear intelligence. "We should head back," Thaddeus decided, turning to Ember. "Will you come with us?" The bear made a negative sound, glancing toward the eastern ridges where Mistral was meeting with the northern representatives. Her meaning was clear. She needed to join that gathering, not accompany the humans to their village. "Tomorrow, then," Thaddeus agreed, placing his hand briefly on Ember's broad forehead in farewell. "Same time?" Ember's affirmative grunt brought a smile to both humans' faces before she turned and loped gracefully into the forest, her powerful body moving with surprising speed through the underbrush despite her size. As Thaddeus and Mason walked toward Pine Haven, the conversation turned to the upcoming winter preparations. The unique partnership between species had resulted in more abundant food stores for both communities. The bears helped locate remote berry patches and mushroom fields unknown to human gatherers, while villagers shared preservation techniques that allowed the bears to create food caches that remained viable throughout the winter months. "Has there been any word from Riverbend about the incident last month?" Thaddeus asked as they crested a small rise that offered a view of the expanded village below. Mason's expression darkened slightly. Thorne's council voted unanimously to expel the 3 trappers. They've been escorted beyond Riverbend's boundaries and warned never to return to these mountains. The incident had involved rogue trappers attempting to capture bear cubs for illegal sale to traveling circuses, a practice strictly forbidden under the Bear Treaty. What made the offense particularly egregious was that one of the targeted cubs had been Mistral's newest offspring, a female cub born the previous winter. The trappers had been intercepted by a joint patrol of Riverbend hunters and Pine Haven woodsmen, prevented from completing their crime before any bear was harmed. But the violation of trust had sent ripples of unease through both human and bear communities, a reminder that the peace they had established remained fragile and not universally accepted. "Good," Thaddeus said firmly. "The Southern delegation needs to understand that we enforce our treaties, with bears and with each other." Mason glanced sideways at the boy who displayed wisdom far beyond his years. "Sometimes I forget you're only 10, he commented with a hint of amusement. "You speak like a village elder." Thaddeus shrugged, embarrassed by the observation. "I just repeat what Miss Strowl and Elder Frost tell me." "Which is precisely what makes you special," Mason replied. "No one else can hear them as clearly as you do." They completed their journey to Pine Haven in companionable silence, each lost in their own thoughts. The village that greeted them had changed dramatically from the insular settlement of 2 years prior. New construction extended in all directions: guest lodges for visiting delegations, expanded storage facilities for shared food resources, and most impressively, a circular meeting hall built specifically to accommodate both human and bear participants, with wide entrances and reinforced flooring to support the weight of multiple adult bears. Elias Evergreen waited for them at the newly completed observation tower that overlooked the eastern approach to the village. From this vantage point, sentries could spot approaching bears or humans from miles away, allowing proper preparations for any arrival. "What do you think?" Elias asked, as Thaddeus examined the structure with critical eyes. "Will it serve our needs?" "The platform needs more space," Thaddeus replied immediately. "If Elder Frost wishes to address both villages from here, she'll need room to rise to her full height without feeling constrained." Elias nodded, unsurprised by his son's focus on the bear's perspective. "We can extend the eastern section another 6 feet. The support beams are already in place for such an expansion." As father and son discussed modifications to the tower, Linnea approached from the direction of the meeting hall, her arms full of richly dyed fabrics intended for the ceremonial decorations. In the 2 years since the cave encounter, she had assumed leadership of Pine Haven's Healer Guild, expanding their knowledge to include treatments effective for both human and ursine patients. "The Riverbend delegation has just crested Hawk's Ridge," she informed them, nodding toward the southern trail. "They should arrive within the hour. Thorne is leading them personally." This news accelerated their preparations. The gathering planned for the following day would be the largest since the establishment of the Bear Treaty. Representatives from 3 human settlements and potentially 6 bear clans if the northern groups decided to participate. The diplomatic implications extended beyond their mountain region, potentially influencing human-wildlife relations throughout the known territories. "Thaddeus," Elias said, "Elder Frost requested your presence at sundown. She wishes to discuss protocol for introducing the northern bears to our human visitors." The boy nodded solemnly, aware of the responsibility being placed on his young shoulders. As primary interpreter between species, his role in these negotiations was crucial despite his age. "I'll be ready," he promised. "Ember mentioned that Miss Straw returned from the northern ranges. Has she shared her findings with you?" "Not yet," Linnea replied. "She seemed troubled when she passed through the village last night. Something about the northern bears concerns her." Before they could discuss this further, a sentry's horn announced the approach of the Riverbend delegation. The Evergreen family, accompanied by Mason, made their way to the village entrance to formally welcome their human allies. Thorn Stonewall had changed dramatically from the angry young hunter of 2 years ago. Now, leading his village with wisdom and restraint, he had become one of the strongest advocates for human-bear cooperation. His face, once perpetually set in suspicious lines, had softened with new purpose and understanding. "Elias," he called warmly as the Pinehaven contingent approached, "your village grows more impressive with each visit." The men clasped forearms in the traditional mountain greeting, while their respective council members exchanged more formal bows behind them. "The observation tower is finally complete," Elias replied, "though my son has already identified necessary modifications." Thorn smiled down at Thaddeus. "The bear interpreter finds our human construction lacking. I'm not surprised. How are Mistral and her clan faring this season?" "Well, though concerned about the northern bears," Thaddeus answered honestly. "Their territory faces greater human encroachment, and they've had fewer positive interactions with people." Thorn's expression grew serious. "All the more reason for our demonstration to succeed. If we can show the southern traders that coexistence benefits both species, perhaps that philosophy will spread beyond our mountains." As the combined delegations moved toward the village center, a commotion at the eastern perimeter drew their attention. A young sentry was running toward them, his face flushed with excitement or alarm. "Bears approaching!" he called urgently. "Many bears, at least 30. Not just Mistral's clan." Whispers of concern rippled through both delegations. While planned meetings with familiar bear clans had become routine, an unexpected arrival of unknown bears represented potential danger. The northern clans, Thaddeus realized aloud. They must have decided to attend. Elias immediately took charge, his voice calm but authoritative. "Mason, accompany Thaddeus to the eastern boundary. If these are indeed northern bears coming in peace, we must welcome them properly. The rest of us will prepare the meeting hall for additional participants." As the delegates dispersed to their assigned tasks, Thaddeus and Mason hurried toward the eastern approach. They reached the boundary markers just as the first bears emerged from the forest edge. Massive creatures with darker fur and more pronounced shoulder humps than the mountain bears of Mistral's clan. At their head walked Mistral herself, accompanied by Elder Frost on one side and a huge male bear with a distinctive scar across his muzzle on the other. Behind this leadership trio came bears of all ages, moving in the organized formation that indicated a peaceful approach rather than a threatening advance. "That must be Thunderscar," Mason whispered, referring to the northern leader whose name had become legendary among the mountain communities, for both his size and his previous hostility toward humans. "I never thought he would agree to enter a human settlement."